So as for the consequences then that status has, or status distinctions, how they impact on the broader realm of social stratification. So you see that through those examples already. Status really restricts social interaction. This is most obvious in marriage rules, the rules that govern whom you can legitimately marry. Yeah? And it's very often religion, but above all, really in contemporary US society, your ethnic group that restricts marriage. So even though this is a very multi-ethnic society, actually the rates of intermarriage of different ethnic groups is extraordinarily low, extraordinarily low. And this is of course defined by the assumption that you share a certain culture, and the overall consequence is that you move only in certain circles, you marry only in certain circles. Yeah? So it restricts social interaction. And further, and this is the really interesting aspect, it limits the strict operation of markets. So it restricts the operation of class. The brute force of economic power is limited by the operation of status. Think, for example, precisely of this issue of gaining admission to Harvard. Of course, legacy is a big issue with all the Ivy League colleges. If your parents have gone to Harvard, if your grandparents have gone to Harvard, if they're donating money, then you have a big foot in the door. But legacy is not the only thing that counts. I mean, all these Ivy League institutions pay a lot of attention to having a diverse student body in terms of, above all, ethnicity, but also in terms of class. So you have a lot of kids studying at Harvard who don't have the economic power to back up their situation. They may get financial aid to actually go to Harvard. They don't directly need to pay for it. Actually, it's really most recently that Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, they have all moved to admission rules which broaden the pool of students who cannot economically actually pay for it, and they get direct aid from these institutions. But once you are at Harvard, you're considered to have that claim to that status that a Harvard degree gives you. So once you do have a degree, then it's, or even if you're admitted to Harvard, it's in social interaction impolite to even inquire about your economic prowess. So, but it restricts, in that sense, the strict operation of markets. If it were not for the symbolic aspect that a Harvard degree gives you, if it were just economic prowess, then it would be sheer and order just based on class. But what is actually happening is that status also counts. So once you have a Harvard degree, even if you don't have the economic power to back it up, you have a pedigree. Considered to be something. Someone will go, oh, the person has a Harvard degree, or a Princeton degree, or a Columbia degree. Of course, that then gives you economic opportunities to also change your class status. But it's really the pedigree that counts from having a degree from a institution like that. And Weber now interestingly notices, remember he traveled in the US, which is also the basis for his work on the Protestant ethic, but of course he was also observing in general the social stratification in the United States that he observed. And he notes that the United States at the time of when he was observing it was moving towards a system of stratification that's increasingly based on status, not on direct economic power. So he writes, in its characteristic form, stratification by status groups on the basis of conventional styles of life evolves at the present time in the United States out of the traditional democracy. For example, only the resident of a certain street, the street, is considered as belonging to society, is qualified for social intercourse, and is visited and invited. Above all, this differentiation evolves in such a way as to make for strict submission to the fashion that is dominant at a given time in society. To the style of life, stylization of your dress, for example. This submission to fashion also exists among men in America to a degree unknown in Germany, because its comparison is always Germany. It appears as an indication of the fact that a given man puts forward a claim to qualify as a gentleman. This submission decides, at least prima facie, so at least in face-to-face interaction, that he will be treated as such. And this recognition becomes just as important for his employment chances in swank establishment, and above all for social intercourse and marriage with esteemed families, as the qualification for dueling among Germans. As for the rest, status honor is usurped by certain families resident for a long time and of course correspondingly wealthy. So here you get a first indication that status has really something to do with having a long history of social esteem, coming from a wealthy family. Think of the Kennedy clan. Yeah? So this is what usually gives you status, having that history. But what Weber found is that you have an intermingling. You always have people who don't have that long-standing honor but are still admitted into certain social circles. And he mentioned as an example of his time the American Gentlemen's Club. Yeah? The equality of status among American gentlemen, for instance, is expressed by the fact that outside the subordination determined by the different functions of business, it would be considered strictly repugnant, wherever the old tradition still prevails, if even the richest boss, by playing billiards or cards in his club, would not treat his clerk as in every sense fully his equal in birthright, but would bestow upon him the condescending status-conscious benevolence, which the German boss can never dissever from his attitude. This is one of the most important reasons why in America the German clubs have never been able to attain the attraction that the American clubs have. So there's a certain expectation in American Gentlemen's Club of the time that Weber was, when he was writing, that even if you are of a very different class status, you're considered to be, it's considered to be legitimate to move in the same social circles if you're in the same business. And the German clubs have not attracted that kind of membership because they have followed more closely the class distinctions. And that again relates back to this issue of, for example, once you have pedigree from an elite institution, you are a member of the club, okay? No matter what your class background is. Yeah? So there's a real distinction here between Europe on that account and the US, in that status seems to lie on top of these class distinctions. So what directly operates is honor, not sheer economic power. Yeah? So he notes that as very, very unique at that time for the United States. In my own analysis, this is what accounts for very frequently the inability of people in the United States to actually see the operation of class that is still below this issue of status. Yeah? But we come back to that in the end. So before looking more into this relationship between status and class, because they are very complex combinations. It's not the same thing. But before we do that, we first need to look at what Weber has to say about caste. Weber argues that a regular status group, based on style of life, based, for example, on belonging to a specific ethnic group or a religion, or a certain social circle, sometimes that evolves into a closed caste. Yeah? So this is an extreme case. A caste system is an extreme case of a status system. So when status distinctions are not just based on conventions, on what is always being done, but based on religious sanctions, then it becomes a caste. Religious sanctions, here you have to recall Durkheim's concept of what actually is the most basic distinction that any religion, whatever religion it is, the most basic distinction that religions make is that between what is considered sacred and what is considered to be profane, what is considered to be pure and what is considered to be impure. So this is Weber's meaning here of religious sanctions in that sense. The clearest example of this is maybe the so-called untouchables, the Dalits, they used to be called untouchables in the Indian caste system, who were considered of such low esteem, extreme low esteem, that even touching them or touching what they touch is considered to make you impure. Yeah? So you seek to distance yourself, even physically, as far as possible from that caste. Yeah? So this is an extreme distinction.